The night I met Bailey Henderson, I was 3 whiskeys deep and playing to an audience of 12 people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. That should have been my first clue that fate was about to rearrange my life with all the subtlety of a tornado touching down in a trailer park. My name is Jonathan Rivers, and I make my living singing country songs to crowds that sometimes remember to clap. I've been chasing Nashville dreams for 8 years now, driving from one small-town bar to another in a beat-up Ford truck that burns oil and holds my guitar cases like they're made of gold. Most nights, I play to empty seats and bartenders who've heard every sob story set to 3 chords and the truth. But that Thursday night in Cedar Falls, Wyoming, something shifted. I was halfway through Whiskey Won't Fix This Heart when the door opened, and in walked a man who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a Marlboro advertisement. Tall, weathered, wearing Wranglers that had seen honest work and boots that had walked through more than just barroom sawdust. He took off his hat as he entered, running a hand through dark hair that needed cutting, and found a spot at the far end of the bar where the light barely reached. Something about the way he settled onto that bar stool told me he was used to being alone. Not lonely exactly, but alone by choice, the way some men learn to be when the world keeps disappointing them. I finished the song and found myself looking his way more than I should have. During my break, I ordered another whiskey and worked up the nerve to approach him. Up close, he was even more striking. Weathered hands wrapped around a beer bottle, green eyes that seemed to see everything and give away nothing, a face that told stories he'd never speak aloud. "Don't think I've seen you around here before," I said, which was a lie. I'd been playing Cedar Falls for 2 years and knew most of the regulars. He glanced up, and when he smiled, it was small and careful. "Bailey Henderson," he said, offering his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, honest, just passing through. "Jonathan Rivers," I said back. "You're not much for small talk, are you?" "Not much," he admitted, but something in his voice suggested he didn't mind mine. I should have gone back to the stage then, should have finished my set and collected my $150 and driven on to the next town. Instead, I found myself asking, "What kind of work brings you through Cedar Falls?" "Cattle," he said simply. "Moving a herd from Colorado to Montana. We're camped about 10 miles north of here." The way he said "we" made me picture a whole crew of cowboys, but when I asked, he shook his head. "Just me and my foreman, Jake. Been doing this route for 5 years now." There was something in his voice when he mentioned being on the road that resonated deep in my chest. 2 men, I thought, both making their living by never staying put, both carrying everything they owned in vehicles that had seen better decades. "Play something upbeat," called someone from the back, and Bailey's attention shifted to the small stage where my guitar waited under the single spotlight. "That's my cue," I said, and he nodded. "I'll listen," he said, and somehow that simple promise felt like the most important audience I'd ever had. The second set was different. I played songs I hadn't touched in months, older stuff that dug deeper, and every time I looked toward that corner of the bar, Bailey was watching. Not staring, not making me nervous, just listening with the kind of attention that made me remember why I'd started playing music in the first place. When I finished Long Gone Lonesome Blues, he was the first to clap. After last call, I packed my gear slowly, hoping he wouldn't disappear before I could work up the courage to suggest coffee. But Bailey was still there when I carried my guitar cases to the parking lot, leaning against a dusty pickup that made mine look like a luxury vehicle. "Good show," he said, and coming from him, it felt like a review in Rolling Stone. "Thanks." I set my cases down, suddenly unsure what came next. "You sticking around town tomorrow?" He considered this like it was a complicated question. "Was planning to move the herd at first light?" "Was planning," I repeated. "That's not the same as will." That small smile appeared again. "No," he said, "it's not." We stood there in the parking lot while the bar emptied around us. 2 men who'd just met but felt like we were continuing a conversation that had started years ago. "There's a diner on Main Street," I said. "Opens at 6, makes coffee that could wake the dead." Bailey touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so unconsciously graceful it made my chest tighten. "I'll see you there," he said, and I knew he meant it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my motel room, writing a song about green eyes and careful smiles, about the way some people carry their loneliness like a badge of honor. By morning, I had 3 verses and no idea what I was doing. The diner was exactly what you'd expect in a town like Cedar Falls. Red vinyl booths, coffee that could strip paint, and a waitress named Dolores who called everyone honey and meant it. Bailey was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall and his hat on the seat beside him. He'd ordered for both of us. Coffee, eggs over easy, toast that was more butter than bread. "Figured you for a simple breakfast kind of guy," he said by way of explanation. "You figured right." I slid into the booth across from him and tried to ignore how right this felt, sharing a meal with a man I'd known for less than 12 hours. We talked easily. He told me about growing up on a ranch outside Cheyenne, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the year his father died and left him with land he couldn't afford to keep. I told him about small-town Georgia, about a mother who sang in the church choir and a father who thought music was a hobby, not a living. "When did you know?" he asked, nodding toward the guitar case I'd leaned against the booth. "Know what?" "That this was your life. The music, the traveling." I thought about it, stirring sugar into my 3rd cup of coffee. First time I made someone cry with a song. I was 15 playing at a church talent show, and Mrs. Patterson started weeping during the chorus. Later, she told me it reminded her of her late husband. I looked up at it. "When did you know you were meant to be on the road?" Bailey was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Day I realized I was happier sleeping under stars than under any roof I'd ever known." There was something in the way he said it that made me think there was more to the story, but I didn't push. Some truths take their own time. "I should get moving," he said, but he didn't reach for his hat. "Yeah," I agreed. "Me too. Got a gig in Laramie tomorrow night." "Laramie's on the way to Montana," he said carefully. My heart did something complicated. "Is it?" "Might be." We split the check and walked out into morning light that painted the mountains gold. Bailey's truck was loaded with supplies: feed, water barrels, a bedroll tied behind the cab. Everything a man needed to live between one place and the next. "Jonathan," he said, and the way he said my name made me turn around. He was standing beside his truck, keys in his hand, looking like a man wrestling with a decision he hadn't expected to have to make. "I don't usually—" He started, then stopped, took off his hat and ran his fingers through his hair. "Hell, I don't know what I usually do in this situation." "What situation is that?" He looked at me directly then, and I saw something in his green eyes that took my breath away. Confusion, maybe, or recognition. "Meeting someone who makes me want to change my route," he said simply. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could have laughed it off, could have wished him well and climbed into my own truck and driven west while he drove north. Instead, I heard myself saying, "So change it." It's not that simple, isn't it? Bailey put his hat back on, settled it carefully. "I've been on my own for a long time, Jonathan. It's what I know." "I've been on my own too," I said. "Doesn't mean it's what I want." Something shifted in his expression. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. The look of a man who'd built his life around not needing anyone and suddenly finding that foundation shaky. "Laramie," he said finally. "Laramie," I agreed. "The Rusty Spur. I know the place. 8 o'clock show." He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "I'll be there." He drove away in a cloud of dust, and I stood in that parking lot for 5 minutes after his truck disappeared, wondering what the hell I'd just done. In 8 years of chasing music dreams, I'd never let anyone affect me like this. Never felt like my whole trajectory could shift based on whether someone showed up to hear me play. The drive to Laramie gave me too much time to think. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just 2 lonely travelers finding momentary connection. But every time I remembered the way Bailey had said, "Meeting someone who makes me want to change my route," my hands tightened on the steering wheel, and my chest did that complicated dance again. The Rusty Spur was bigger than the bar in Cedar Falls, with a proper stage and sound system that didn't screech when I turned up the volume. The crowd was bigger too, maybe 40 people on a Friday night, enough to make me feel like I was earning my money. I set up early and spent the hour before showtime watching the door. Every time it opened, my heart jumped, and every time it wasn't Bailey, I felt like I was losing something I'd never actually had. 8 o'clock came and went. I started with my usual opener, a fast song that got people's attention and warmed up my voice. 8:15, 8:30. By the time I launched into my fourth song, I'd accepted that Bailey Henderson was going to remain one of those might-have-beens that every traveling musician collects. Then the door opened, and there he was. He looked different without his hat, younger somehow, and he'd changed into a clean shirt that brought out those impossible green eyes. He found a table near the back and settled in like he planned to stay. And when our eyes met across the room, he touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a small salute. The rest of the show was for him. I played every song like it was a conversation, like I was telling him things I didn't know how to say in regular words. When I sang about lonesome highways, I meant the ones that had brought us together. When I sang about finding home in unexpected places, I meant the way his presence had transformed a room full of strangers into something that felt like possibility. During my break, he approached the stage. "Buy you a drink?" he asked. "I don't usually drink during shows," I said. "I don't usually ask," he replied. And there was something in his voice that made me set down my guitar and follow him to the bar. We found a quiet corner where the music from the jukebox mixed with conversation and the sound of pool balls clicking. Bailey ordered 2 beers and handed me one like we were sealing a deal. "I almost didn't come," he said without preamble. "But you did." "But I did." He took a long pull from his beer. Spent the whole day trying to convince myself it was a bad idea. "What changed your mind?" Bailey looked at me directly, and I saw that same confusion from the morning, only deeper now. "Haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he said quietly. "About last night, this morning. About the way you play like every song matters." My heart was doing that complicated dance again, but I kept my voice steady. "And that scares you?" "Terrifies me," he admitted. "I'm not. I've never..." He stopped, frustrated, like the words weren't coming out right. "Never what?" "Never felt like this about a man before." The honesty of it hit me like a physical force. Bailey Henderson, this weathered cowboy who looked like he could handle anything the world threw at him, was sitting in a bar in Laramie, Wyoming, telling me he was questioning everything he thought he knew about himself. "Neither have I," I said, because it was true. I'd had relationships with women, relationships with men, but nothing that felt like this, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you were about to jump and not caring where you landed. "So what do we do?" he asked. I finished my beer and set it down. "We figure it out as we go." The second set was electric. I played with a freedom I'd never felt before, knowing Bailey was watching, knowing he was there by choice, despite everything that scared him about it. When I closed with a song I'd written that morning about finding something worth changing your route for, I sang it directly to him. And when I finished, the applause felt secondary to the look in his eyes. After I packed up, we walked out into the Wyoming night together. The air was thin and clean, full of stars that city boys like me never got to see. "Walk with me?" Bailey asked, and I nodded. We ended up by a creek that ran behind the bar, the sound of water over stones mixing with distant music from the rusty spur. Bailey sat on a fallen log, and I joined him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous habit." That earned me a smile. "About what you said this morning. About it not being that simple to change your route." "And? Maybe simple isn't the point. Maybe some things are worth being complicated for." I turned to look at him fully and found him already watching me. In the moonlight, his face was all angles and shadows, beautiful in a way that made my chest tight. "Bailey," I said, his name coming out rougher than I intended. "Yeah, I think I'm falling for you." The words hung between us like a confession. Bailey was quiet for so long I started to wonder if I'd pushed too hard, too fast. Then he reached out and touched my face, his calloused thumb tracing along my cheekbone. "I think I'm falling too," he said quietly, "and it scares the hell out of me." "We don't have to figure it all out tonight," I said. "No," he agreed, "but we have to start somewhere." He leaned closer, and I could smell leather and sage and something that was purely him. Our foreheads touched, and I could feel his breath against my lips. "Jonathan," he whispered. "Yeah?" "I've never done this before." "Neither have I. Not like this." And then he kissed me. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was asking a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. But when I kissed him back, when I let him know that yes, this was what I wanted too, something shifted between us. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate and absolutely right. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Bailey rested his forehead against mine and closed his eyes. "Well," he said after a moment. "Well," I agreed. "That settles that, I guess." I laughed, sudden and bright. "Does it?" Bailey opened his eyes and looked at me, and what I saw there was no longer confusion or fear. It was certainty, warm and solid and real. "Yeah," he said, "it does."